So this morning we have our guest, Matt Lowe's, and I first want to just mention some books that he's written. This one is, there we go. That Which Is Before You. This is basically a story of his awakening, his path and awakening, and then some teachings in there. And then When You Are Silent, It Speaks. That's better. Which is more teachings, basically. And then this is a really interesting one. A billion fingers point at the moon. And this comes from a Buddhist saying about teachings are just fingers pointing at the moon. They're not the moon of enlightenment itself. They just point at. And this is an interesting one because he's really talking about all the ways you can't talk about enlightenment. And it does a pretty thorough job. It's very good. So if you want to find out where all those teachings end in silence, this is the book for you. They all lead to where you just say, okay, stop thinking about it. And then that's when you're silent, you see, it all hangs together. So just very briefly, the way I know Matt is Mark Horowitz, sometime before the pandemic, that's about 2018 or something
16,
like that.
yeah.
16.
What?
2016.
Yeah.
2016, oh, okay. He took me aside and he said, I have this friend, and I think he's awake. He's told me about what's happened to him. I'd like to get you guys together. So I said, sure, fine, let's do that. So we got together, and Matt told me his story, and I listened, and I asked him a few questions, and then there was nothing more to say. I mean, it was clear to me that he was awake, and that's the trouble. We don't really have that much to say about that. We can talk about other interesting mundane things, but spirituality, there's really the billion fingers point, but they don't get there. Anyway, so I then subsequently listened to some talks he's given, answering questions, a lot of answering questions, and it was very interesting to me because I'd sit there and I'd listen to the questions, and he gave the answer I would have given. I mean, almost word for word. I go, what? Wait, where'd you get that? So
I've been channeling stuff to him secretly.
So anyway, he's got a website you can check out those talks and so well, it's mattlowes.com or
MatthewLowes.com.
Right.
Yeah.
So just Lowes is Lowe's, and Matthew's the way Matthew's usually spelled. So you can check that out. And then last summer I asked him if he wanted to come and be a guest speaker here, and he said yes. So here we are. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, first, I just want to thank you all for inviting me, and especially thanking Joel for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here, and especially honored to be here with two teachers I really hold dear. And I've been asked to talk a little bit about my path and give an account of my awakening, which I am more than happy to do. Some context will be needed, so but I will try to summarize kind of 30 years of wandering in the wilderness with a few key anecdotes, and then we'll get to the good stuff, and hopefully to your questions as well, and hopefully we can glean something helpful or inspiring from the proceedings. I do have a few notes because for 25 minutes, I need something to keep me on track, especially when the subject has to do with me. So, so forgive me for using some notes, but I trust it'll be for the best. So when I was 14, the year was 1986, I lay down in a field, looked up at the stars and had a kind of, not even a kind of, I really had a spontaneous out-of-body experience. I rose up out of my body, I went straight up towards the stars. And no matter how high I got, and despite the darkness, I could still see my body way down below. And I just kept going up and up, But as soon as I started to go right out into space, I got scared. And when I got scared, I sort of slowly materialized back inside my body. Afterward, I felt something profound had happened, but there was nothing to do about it, really, and I had to get home for dinner. But that experience put a big seed in my mind, a really big question, which was, what the heck is really going on? You know? So 2 years later, I found a book about yoga meditation on my parents' bookshelf. And I got interested in it and started meditating by the book, so to speak. You know, I followed the instructions as they were laid out in the book. I started with a series of candle gazing exercises, but before long, I turned to an attempt to stop all of my thoughts. Nobody told me it was supposed to be hard, so I just set about doing it very methodically. Well, first watching my thoughts, then dropping my thoughts, then dropping them earlier and earlier. And then they stopped. And in that moment, I ceased to exist. And yet consciousness filled a vast, all-knowing cosmic void. I have no idea really how long this experience lasted, but when I returned, again, I felt something profound had happened. But again, there was nothing to do about it. And I had to get to dinner. So this experience also put another big seed in my mind, a huge question, or I'm sorry, a really big thought. And that thought was, maybe the ultimate truth is knowable, you know? But, you know, I was 16 years old, and let's be honest, a lot of things way more important than cosmic consciousness were going on at the time, you know? And before long, I was falling in love, going to college, traveling the world. I started studying martial arts, and generally just getting lost in philosophy, academics, ambitions, and life in general. I was reading about Zen and Hindu traditions at the time. This was while I was in college, and was still sort of sporadically experimenting with meditation. I was very interested in enlightenment. At some point, I wondered if I had already experienced it, thinking back of what had happened when I was 16. But if that was enlightenment, it was a fleeting experience that didn't really seem relevant to my life or to this world. And if enlightenment was something else, well, there really didn't seem to be any way to get there. So at some point, I thought it must not be real. You know, I thought I'm a pretty smart guy, and if I can't figure it out, it must not be real. It shows how smart I really was. So throughout my 20s and 30s, I built up a huge ambition, which was to be a writer, to write novels, and to create some great literary work. I moved around a lot. I took up and quit a variety of jobs in order to spend more time writing. But in the background, really, I was always searching for some kind of truth, true love, and liberation, some kind of happiness that would satisfy me. The search could kind of go underground for a while I pursued worldly ambitions. But it was always there, and in some way, even my worldly ambitions were just a misguided version of that search. Sporadically, I had a number of enigmatic encounters and strange experiences that kept me searching for answers. Some of them were quite wonderful. glimpses of a beauty indistinguishable from love, transcendent vision, an oceanic consciousness that lies beyond death. But others were admittedly quite terrifying. Once I had an experience that had me truly thinking I had lost my mind. And in sleep transition states, I had repeated encounters with a variety of demonic and alien beings. I tried to make sense of these experiences in a variety of ways, but I never gave up my search for truth. I wanted to really know what was going on, not just speculate, not just conjecture. And just as importantly, truth never gave up on me. While I was lost in confusion, it found ways to encourage me, to keep me wondering and searching. At 28, I was a night auditor at a hotel to maximize my writing time. And I had a lot of solitary time at night on the weekends. And I had figured out how to self-induce out-of-body experiences. And to be honest, I was just exploring, just seeing what I could do, what was possible, and trying to understand what this experience was. Could I see into the other room? Could I get down to the pool? Could I get down to the graveyard down the street? One day I lay down for another go at it. I got into the right state, but instead of just rising out of my body as was usual, an invisible angelic being took hold of me and pulled me out of my body. I was completely unafraid and comforted by its embrace. It wanted to take me somewhere, and I was happy to go with it. We went right out the sliding glass door of my third floor balcony, out among the pines, and turned left. We went into a kind of in-between realm, someplace else. It was sort of dark, but I could see clearly nonetheless. We stood overlooking a suburban street, some houses, and green rolling hills in the distance. The angel pointed to my right. Look, and there in the sky above the horizon, I saw the most beautiful light I had ever seen. A brilliant white, radiating with love and bliss, that I recognized as the light of God shining out of heaven. I stood in rapture, really, profound longing to go into that light. And after a few moments, the angel indicated it was time to go, and the light started to set like the sun on the horizon. And I thought, no, don't go, don't go, don't go. But the angel embraced me again, took me back the way we came, and gently returned me to my body. Not long after that, I got married.
Sequitur?
All of the various strands of my life seemed to come together. I invested everything in the belief that this worldly union was representative of a spiritual reality. And through it all, my dreams and ambitions would come to fruition. We had love. We had a plan that would allow us both to pursue our ambitions. We had a shared sense of spiritual longing that we pursued through practice in the Catholic Church. We were all in. So when that marriage fell apart 3 years later, everything kind of went with it. A chain reaction had started that would burn through my life over the course of about 10 years. Although I went on training in martial arts, writing a trilogy of fantasy novels, working in public schools, occasionally dating, inwardly, everything was falling apart. And there didn't seem to be any way to put it back together. It was a dark time, but I was always kind of a stubborn person, determined to see life through to the bitter end, no matter how bitter. In 2005, I started some new martial arts training that really transformed my practice. the defining quality of the training was not techniques, but rather looking closely at every aspect of experience and really knowing yourself inside and out, warts and all. The martial arts element, while deadly serious, was also kind of a catalyst for studying the body, the psyche, the spirit, others, the world, everything really. It helped me look beyond thoughts and theories, fears and desires, and really start to look plainly at what's actually happening, moment by moment. You might describe it as a kind of full contact Vipassana practice. Martial applications. In 2012, I was at a 4-day seminar with a focus on firearms, gunfighting, basically. And time was set aside each morning for some introspective training related to fear. After one particularly intense drill, I lay on the ground observing and processing the flood of emotions and sensations in my body. I was just breathing and looking. And I started to get a sense of what I describe as a spider thing that was wrapped around me, sort of attached to my back and extending all through my body, down my limbs, and it became very clear. And I got very curious about it. I thought, what is that? What is that? And then suddenly it came to me, oh, that's me. That's me holding on to myself. And as soon as I realized it, the thing let go. And I experienced this huge cathartic release. I was sobbing. I had a kind of a breakdown. When I described the experience to the teacher, he said, "That's very good." Go outside and lay in the sun for a while. Don't do anything the rest of the day. Now, in retrospect, I can kind of see where all this was going. But at the time, I was still quite lost. I kept training and I was teaching martial arts as well, but at some point I started to lose interest. Over 20 years, I had practiced for continual improvement, but after sort of moving past some of the obstacles that I had perceived, I started to lose interest in getting any better. Actually, in a lot of ways, I became disillusioned with every aspect of my life. I had drifted away from religion. I was largely indifferent to relationships. And I had resigned myself to quiet jobs and to literary obscurity. In 2013, I actually visited CSS with Mark Hurwitz and heard Joel speak. At that point in my life, I was very skeptical, even cynical about everything, and certainly about all things spiritual. I remember being really impressed with how normal and straightforward Joel seemed. But enlightened? Come on. Actually, when I consider it now, this encounter feels quite profound. But nothing really changed. I was still cynical. I still felt stuck. And I was depressed and on the verge of a personal crisis. Increasingly, I was afflicted with an inner rage unlike anything I had ever known before. But in late 2015, by the grace of God, all the various threads of my life had fully run their course. I seemed to come full circle. I thought about traveling again, but with no expectation of finding myself as I had in my youth, or of finding anything else for that matter. I started meditating again, but with the most mundane goals imaginable. I just thought it might help with depression and anxiety, which it did. I started reading some spiritual books again and was listening to the wonderful lectures of Alan Watts. But I wasn't looking for anything in them. I just thought they might give some helpful perspective, which they did. I was truly no longer seeking. I had tried everything, and nothing had worked. No thought, no practice, no experience, no technique, no relationship, no religion, no philosophy. I found myself able to accept that nothing would make me happy, that there was nowhere really to go and nothing really to do except stumble forward and see what happens. And accordingly, I made certain gestures toward letting go of all hope and fear in my life. Ironically, after I stopped looking for anything at all, in early 2016, things started to make sense in a way they never had before. I was thinking quite deeply, but in a new way. I was looking at things directly, without preconceptions or expectations. For example, I got to thinking about time, and I would be trying to detect time directly within my present experience. I remember sitting at my desk, and I would pick up a pen, move it over to the other side, and set it down. And then I would be racking my mind trying to figure out what had just happened. Another day, I remember trying to perceive and really pin down the limits of my body. This kind of investigation culminated one day with a question, and that question was, what is my mind and where did it come from? I remember looking at the trees as I drove home from work and understanding that just as the trees grew out of this world, my body and my mind must also have grown out of this world. I could see that my mind was no different than the trees. Everything was the same, inside and outside. Around this time, I was reading a book called Zen, Beyond All Words by Wolfgang Kopp. It's a book I had purchased some 20 years earlier in New York and had never read. Every time I tried to read this book, it seemed either simple to the point of stupidity or else somehow condescending. But nevertheless, I held on to it for 20 years. And when I read it this time, I tore through it. And the contents hit my mind like a sledgehammer. I started to feel quite strange. One day I said to my girlfriend, I'm done. What do you mean you're done? She said. I mean, I'm done. I'm done with everything. I'm out of the game. I have nothing to say about anything anymore. I started to feel so strange, in fact, that I worried my coworkers would think I was on drugs, which I wasn't. I just felt unmoored, and life in the world seemed dreamlike and ephemeral. One day I got out of a long shower and I said to my girlfriend, I think I'm immortal. I said it in a half-joking way because I knew it would sound strange, but I was quite serious because somehow it seemed clear to me that this body could die, but I could not. On April 11th, from my job at Oak Ridge High School, I headed out to lunch at Greenwaters Park on the banks of the Willamette River. It's a lovely spot. I sat at a picnic table and ate my lunch. A crow landed at the other side of the table and watched me. I remember thinking how strange it looked, and yet how familiar. I can't really explain the feeling. I finished my lunch, threw out my trash, then turned around and looked up at the trees. When I looked up at the trees, the whole universe turned inside out. There was a kind of optical shift, as if I passed through a tunnel. And then there was no inside or outside anymore. Everything radiated with an unimaginable beauty. And I heard a voice that said, "This is everything. Everything that ever was, is, or will be is right here in front of you. It always has been. It always will be." And the words were plainly true. No words can describe my amazement, my absolute joy in that moment. It took a moment to sort of process what was happening. I could hardly believe it, but it was happening. I walked down toward the river, spun around, and laughed out loud. This was clearly what everyone had been talking about. There was just no doubt. This is it, I thought. This is enlightenment. But there was nowhere for the thought to land, and no one to claim it. How could I have missed this for so long? It really was plain to see. There was no separation between things. There was no near or far. There was no self or other. I went down by the river, ran my hands through the branches of plants, and looked out at the water. Everything was the same. Same river, same branches, same plants, same hand, same water. But I could see the one reality in which all this appeared. After a few infinite minutes at the riverbank, I looked at my watch and knew I had to get back to work. When I got in the car, I wasn't even entirely sure I could drive. But the school wasn't far, and I just resolved to be very careful. I got back without incident and did my job, no problem, but in total amazement at everything I experienced. And when I left that day, driving down the mountains, the trees swayed with mysterious, wondrous intelligence, and every dark corner of my being filled with bliss. Now, there's a few things to say about how things unfolded after that. First, when I went to bed that night, I thought, surely this will end. But it never did. Nothing that arose thereafter could ever touch this ongoing experience, because it wasn't really an experience. It was just reality itself. And you can't break reality. Any thought or view can be argued over or overturned, but that which underlies everything, which is ever present and all-encompassing, cannot really be undermined. And fundamental happiness abounds in the awareness of this reality. Second, initially, I tried to question the obvious. I examined various possibilities. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe I had a brain tumor. But nothing really added up. One day, as I sat in my room at work, I thought, maybe I was dead. Really dead, actually dead. And for a moment, I got caught in the thought. I believed it. I started to get a little scared. How did I die? How did my parents find out? Geez, what's going to happen now? And then instantly, I realized, oh, that's just a thought. And from that point on, it was clear life and death are only ideas. Third, although realization happened fully in an instant, there were some small r realizations that unfolded over the subsequent weeks, sort of understanding the full implications of what had happened. For example, after seeing clearly the emptiness of the ego, one day it became clear to me that not only was the individual self empty, but so too were the rocks and the trees and the ground we walk on. So too were all thoughts, all emotions, all sensations. All phenomena are emptiness, as the Heart Sutra says. There is absolutely nothing to hang on to. And yet, we are held in the arms of God. And in that is a love and a security undreamt of. Lastly, I'd like to say just a few words about sharing with Mark what had happened to me, and he was kind enough to set up the meeting with Joel, for which I am ever grateful, and I am ever grateful for Joel's wisdom and his no-nonsense approach.
Okay.
Okay. Everything he told me proved true, and really was exactly the teaching I needed to hear at the time. While visiting with him, I'll say I was trying to explain something that I had sensed one day that was so overwhelmingly powerful. I was trying to explain what it was, struggling to find the words. And Joel leaned forward in his chair, looked me right in the eyes, and said, "Was it bliss?" And in that moment, I knew he knew exactly what I was talking about. At that time, bliss wasn't even a word in my vocabulary. But straight away, I said, yes, it was bliss. It was beyond bliss. As far as what lessons we can glean from this whole crazy story, if you're seeking the truth, keep going. The opportunity for awakening never expires. Don't give up until the whole mountain of delusion collapses under its own weight. Throw yourself into your practice and do whatever you can to bring yourself to the doorstep of awakening. As the gospel says, to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Enlightenment isn't complicated. It just doesn't leave anything out. So find whatever you're leaving out and fold it into everything. Thank you all.
Wow. See, I don't have to really add to that much. I will say this, that you mentioned several times in your story, but also at the end, this business about keep seeking. In fact, that's the note you ended on. And my teacher, Franklin Merrill Wolf, we would ask, Andre and I would ask him, what's his secret? And he would say, it's a tendency to drive to the root. And that all his life, they had this tendency to drive to the root. And he said almost the exact same thing you said at a certain point, that he didn't care what the truth was. If the truth turned out to be awful, if the truth turned out to be that, the world is just a nightmare and this, well, okay, but he wanted to know it. He wanted to know it. And he wanted to know it with certainty. That was the other thing. Not just, well, that sounds like the truth, but just, and so that really was the secret of his path, the way he expressed it to us. So I do think that's really important. Also, what you said about having this sort of seeds planted early and then getting distracted by life and all that, but always in the back of the mind is, and my seed was, part of it was actually when I was 15, I think, my father's wife, it wasn't my mother, my father's wife gave me a book about Zen flesh, Zen bones. And then also she took me to hear some, guess what, seminars by who? Alan Watts. And I went to about 3 or 4 of these when I was 15 or 16. I was fascinated by them,
So good.
Yeah, oh, wonderful. And then, but then like I got distracted by other things. The hormones are flying around and there seems to be more important things to do in life than wake up right now. But anyway, if you look in your own life, I'm sure you'll find everybody has something from early in their life that they got interested a little bit in spirituality or had some experience, and then there's a tendency to poo-poo all that and say, well, that's just, you're just a teenager, just an adolescent, and to let it go. But if you remember it, especially when life turns out to be not so
not as you had planned.
Yes, not as you planned. Very well put. So and it's also, I think, important if you have kids. Then I don't think you should try to indoctrinate them or anything like that. But just make sure that there is some exposure. Best to actually, if they find it, of course, a good way to do it is forbid them to read a book like Zen. You're not old enough to read this yet, right? You really? Anyway.
Yeah, I have the impression that your path wasn't driven by kind of this quality of suffering. It was driven more by inspiration or...
Oh, trust me, there was plenty of suffering. As I just said about being trapped in nihilism, and self-destructive behavior. I was a borderline alcoholic at one point. I fought with myself a lot. So don't get the wrong impression. There was definitely an element of suffering that had me at times desperately looking for a way out.
It seemed like you had confidence somehow in yourself on this path, that like you didn't seek teachers out very much.
Yeah. That's true and not true. My path was kind of all over the map. I did seek out some teachers. Like I said, I trained in martial arts. So I looked for teachers there, but I kept looking. I didn't. I was looking everywhere. I wasn't, blessed with the right teachers until later in my life. That's fine. But that's kind of the path, But yeah, some of it might be personality too. Even with the teachers that I had, some wonderful teachers, I was never a person to ask questions. I would always just listen. And I felt a lot of the times that by the time I knew what question to ask, I would have a pretty good idea what the answer was. And so I often just listened, listen.
Yeah. The other question, I guess, is around what you mean by bliss.
Well, like I said, at the time of my awakening, bliss wasn't even a word in my vocabulary. But, everyone seeks happiness. But the kind of happiness that we imagine, or that we experience in a limited way or relative way, the ups and downs of life, there's that, of course. And that kind of happiness can turn into a kind of bliss, for sure, an experience of bliss. But that kind of bliss ebbs and flows, in my experience, even after awakening. This bliss, it ebbs and flows. But there's a more fundamental bliss that's always there, that's one and the same with reality itself. One and the same with, consciousness itself, with God, with, whatever you want to call it. And that fundamental bliss and its knowledge of its continual presence, just leaves one naturally happy. So, that's kind of how I think about it. the big bliss, the all-encompassing bliss. That's the wonder of wonders. Yeah.
Thanks. When I heard you use this term, what are you leaving out? That really piqued my curiosity, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little more. And I guess I'm curious about, well, the thought came to myself of, oh, well, how would I determine what I'm leaving out, or how would I see that? And so, yeah, I'm curious about that. So I'd appreciate any more words you can share on that idea.
Yeah. Well, just in general, this idea of leaving out is, if you've heard some teachings, this is one and the same with ignorance, right? Ignorance is leaving something out. When we think about the world, we forget about ourselves. And when we think about ourselves, we forget about the world. Basically, we're always leaving something out. Pick anything. When we consider darkness, we forget the light. When we consider the light, we forget about darkness. So, in my experience, this teaching comes straight out of that question that I had: what is my mind, and where did it come from? See, my experience was that's what I was always leaving out. In essence, I was identified with my mind and always keeping that somehow separate. I saw myself as existing in my mind and looking out at the world out there, but the two were separate. See, I was, I was somewhere. I don't know where it was. The dark space of the mind, whatever you want to call that. And I was trying to figure it, so I came upon this question of what is my mind and where is it? And that was, for me, seeing what I had been leaving out all along. And, something happened when I saw that could be folded into everything else that was going on. See, then once you fold everything in like that, I describe this kind of thing as like a culminating thought that folds everything together and doesn't leave any way out. There's no way out then. There's nowhere for you to exist separately. When you see that what you're looking at and your mind are one and the same. Yeah.
Let me add something here, because if you're familiar with Ramana Maharshi's little neti exercise, it's not just his, actually, it's traditional Hinduism, but just whatever you think you are, examine it. So I think I'm my body. Well, I sit there and I see my body is arising in consciousness and it's changing and so forth, but my consciousness isn't changing. So I can't be my body. Sometimes I'm aware of my big toe, sometimes I'm not. It comes and goes. And then you do the same thing with your emotions. You work up some desire and let that go. And you do the same thing with your thoughts. And it helps if you're a meditator, because that's what you train to be able to do this without distraction. But you go through everything you think you are, and you recognize that's not me, that's out there. Well, then what's left? And whatever little bit is left, what I'm this pinpoint of consciousness in here, well, throw that in there too. You can think of it as a bonfire. I like to think of it, throw it all on the fire, and burn it up. And when you've gone through everything, no matter how subtle, but a thing that you could possibly be, and you realize I'm not that, there's nothing left, zero. And when there's nothing left, the whole thing collapses. There's nobody watching anything anymore. I mean, a lot of people, I think, in meditation, this is certainly true of me, get to the point where, yes, you can see there's this kind of emptiness because all this other stuff is arising and passing away, and I'm here. But it's the I'm here that has to go in the fire as well. Even though that I'm here is not, you can't put your finger on it, but there's still that sense of separation. And so it's not just the question of entering deep states of samadhi. I mean, even the samadhi has to go. Ultimately, I mean, it's interesting to enter deep states of samadhi as an exercise towards that, but ultimately even that has to go. Even, I'll say this, even enlightenment has to go, by the way. Whatever idea about enlightenment or, notion about, or like Matt's book, all the ways, a billion fingers point at the moon, all the ways you can't think about the moon. It's worth running through them. Okay, that doesn't, throw that in, throw that in, throw that in. Anyway, that's what I would add to is what you just said.
You'll like the theme of my next book,
What is it?
Lighting the Sacred Fire.
Oh, yeah, bring it on. Bring it on.
It's all about the bonfire.
Wonderful.
You're it.
Okay, hi Matthew. Thank you for sharing. I love hearing these kinds of stories.
It's fun being here.
Yeah, my name is Sophie, and I thought this would be a good opportunity for clarification, maybe even also from Joel. I've been coming to the center for about 12 years, 13 maybe, and especially from earlier on, I always had this impression that we were to practice and practice and practice, and then maybe by the grace of God, one day, one might have a realization experience like you described, or an awakening. And then after that, there would be no more suffering and abiding bliss, abiding happiness. Not the kind of happiness, like you said, that ebbs and flows.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was always my impression, and I think in Joel's book, in his chapter on gnosis, there are some quotes from spiritual people from other traditions who say similar things, like there's no more need to practice. No, once you've arrived. But in my current Sangha group, I'm learning a different take on post-awakening life, and that, in fact, like pure enlightenment is very, very rare, and that post-realization, there still is a need to practice from day to day in order to maintain well-being and ensure not to harm others and this sort of thing. And so I've been changing my perception about awakening, and I just wondered, like, from both of you, in your experience, do you still feel a need to undertake spiritual practices? And then also maybe from Joel, get some clarification on my original impression of once awakening happens, there's no more need to practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So my experience is, I'll start with an anecdote. After my awakening, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I sat down to meditate, as I had before, with some sort of goal or some sort of effort. And I sat down and got into a meditation posture, started as I usually did, and after a few minutes, I thought, well, this is kind of weird. The more I tried to meditate, I was going away from the truth. And I realized I was already in a deep meditative state all the time. So trying to make an effort wasn't, that didn't work anymore. You know, I had to, so, you know, my experience is that you know, how you go about practice changed for me. I still have practices, but the reason for doing them is completely different. The reason can be curiosity, enjoyment, or helping others. And so all those are good reasons to practice or to continue practicing. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, you know, beforehand I practiced to find something. Once found, this purpose goes away.
I think you said it very well, and my experience is just that. And have done a lot of practice. Well, first of all, even today, I practice 10 minutes every morning. First thing, get up, use the bathroom, come out, and Jennifer and I sit down, we meditate for 10 minutes. To me, it's like brushing your teeth. It's just, you relax your mind. I mean, and that's a good way to start the day. I actually always remember from this cheap grade B kung fu movie. Anyway, the chief fighter meditator, every morning he sits there and his young disciple says, "What are you doing that for?" He says, "Every morning I make my mind blank so the day can write upon it." I just think that's beautiful, you know. It's just an image of, you know. So, but ever since I became a teacher, I did a lot of meditations because I was curious. Because I'm going to teach this stuff, I got to know what I'm doing. So I would do these visualizations and melting drops and all kinds of things. I never became an advanced meditator, but I got far enough to know, at least then when I taught this stuff on a retreat, I knew what the effect it had on people. So if they ask me about it, I know where they're at. So, but I have a question for you. What difference does it make to you what's going to happen after you wake up? What do you worry about that for?
No, you know, I almost didn't ask this question because of that. Of late, I've realized
don't worry
it
about
doesn't
that.
matter. Just don't even, like you say, throw that into.
Exactly. See,
If you wake up and you want to meditate, you'll meditate. If you don't want to meditate, you won't meditate.
Yeah.
You won't have a choice about it anymore.
That was one of the things that Joel told me when I first met him. See, I said in my talk, you know, everything he told me proved to be true. Well, one of the things he told me is he said, your life is figured out for you now. And at the time, I remember I said, really? I was so relieved. I was so relieved. But that's proven to be true. It's always been figured out, but you know, now I know it.
Okay, thank you. I'll let that one go now.
Good.
Good one. And, okay, so we'll bring the formal part of the morning to a close, and there's some potluck, and you're welcome to stay and have some potluck. Until we see you again, peace to you all.
Thank you both.